Oklahoma Republican and chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Congressman Tom Cole, joins me now here in the studio for more. Chairman, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Who takes the blame if this happens?
Well, certainly not the House. We voted to keep the government open for an additional 7 weeks while we continue to negotiate. Really on the appropriations bills. These other items really don't belong in a CR. Medicaid is not something the Appropriations Committee has jurisdiction over. The same thing's true with the subsidies for Obamacare that were enacted during COVID and are running out now. But look, we've done everything we can to keep it open and keep talking. Democrats, almost every Republican in the House and the Senate have voted to keep the government open. Almost every Democrat in the House and the Senate voted to close it. It's pretty simple who's responsible for closing the government now. It's an effort to get leverage over items unrelated to day-to-day government funding. I don't think it's going to work.
Do you think the public sees it that way? Republicans have control of both chambers.
I actually represent a very heavy federal district. I have 16,000 civilian defense workers at Tinker Air Force Base, another 6,000 at Fort Sill Army Post, the National Weather Center, Kerr Water Labs from the EPA. So I feel this in my district but they understand. Look, I actually authored the bill to keep the government open for another 7 weeks. Almost every Democrat voted no. So they know who's shutting down the government.
As you say, you authored the bill. Are there any negotiations going on beyond what, we're hours away here? Is there any conversation about what could happen in the next few days?
There's always conversation between members. There's always staff conversation. But you have to look at what Democrats are asking. They're asking for us to commit to spend $1.5 trillion in exchange for a 4-week extension of government spending. That $1.5 trillion would be spent, to be fair, over a decade. It's a ridiculous request. And the only conclusion I can draw is, look, Democrats really want to shut down the government. They're desperately trying to prove that they're fighting President Trump. When Chuck Schumer made the opposite decision in March, that is to keep the government open at current funding levels, he was hammered by his own party, not by President Trump, not by Republicans. We thought he did the smart thing and the right thing then. So this is clearly a political calculation on the part of Minority Leader Jeffries and Minority Leader Schumer that, hey, we got to do something here to look like we're fighting Trump, even if it inconveniences and puts at risk the American people.
That said, you're here in Washington. Many of your members, your Republican members in the House, are not. Shouldn't they at least be here?
Well, really, there's no reason, because we've done our job. We voted to keep the government open. We now have to wait for the Senate to do something. And whatever it does has to be bipartisan. They send it back. We've been told by our leadership, be prepared to be here within 24 to 48 hours. So we're on standby, but there's no reason for them to be here just to watch the Senate respond. Every senator is going to have the opportunity to vote to keep the government open for 7 weeks or shut it down. And if they vote to shut it down, until they actually produce something, the House really doesn't have any purpose. We're waiting on them to respond to our bill that kept the government open.
Is your hope that could be a quick turnaround, that you're on standby in 24, 48 hours?
Look, I'm here for that very reason. I'm a lead negotiator on the appropriations issues. I'd be happy to sit down with my Democratic colleagues. We actually have been negotiating a number of appropriations bills, pretty close to having 3 of them done. But this puts a chill on things. It stalls things. They can't afford to produce appropriations bills while they're shutting down the government, because then we look like, well, gee, they could do their business without putting people out of work. And the reality is we can. This is a conscious decision by the Democratic leadership to shut down the government for a political objective, and they don't care who it hurts. And that's unfortunate. I've seen both parties do it. It never works out well.
I have to ask you, earlier this week, the Supreme Court upheld President Trump's withholding of billions of dollars in foreign aid that had been appropriated by Congress. You're the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. Does that decision concern you?
Not a lot. Frankly, if you actually read the decision, what they did was stay a lower court decision and still reserve the right to make the final decision. So they have not made a final decision. They made that very clear in the opinion. They just said, for now, the president can proceed. We'll deliberate on the issue when it actually happens.
But isn't it Congress's job to have the power of the purse?
We do have the power of the purse. The only rescission that's been done is one that Congress voted for. So I think we have it. But the real question, this is a sort of a murky area. The Office of Management and Budget has had this position since Gerald Ford was president. The Government Accounting Office had the same position, and they work for us, not the president, until 2018. So it's actually a pretty minor area, but it's an area that probably we're going to have the Supreme Court address and we'll go from there. But it's not like the president gets to spend more than we appropriate. He doesn't. And so I'm quite content that Article 1 congressional appropriations powers are in effect. The problem is we're shutting the government down, or the Senate is, and that's actually going to enhance the power of the executive branch. So if you want the executive branch power limited, you keep Congress in session and working on appropriations bills.
You hope the Supreme Court ultimately rules against some of those decisions?
Look, I prefer to vote on it, but I accept the Supreme Court will rule. There are good lawyers on both sides of this. This is a legitimate question. It was debated as early as the 1970s when Gerald Ford, hardly a dangerous radical, claimed that he had this power, and OMB backed him up. But that's no big surprise. OMB works for the president. Every OMB office is going to want to expand the presidency power. So we'll let that get resolved in court. But the main work of the committee is not a few $billion. It's a $1.7 trillion appropriations package, and that's what we ought to be working on. The House voted to do it. So far, the Senate has refused to.
Plenty of work ahead in the weeks and months, days.
There sadly is, but we just need to get about doing our job. You can't do that when you're closed down. That's the decision the Democrats have made.
Congressman, thanks so much for your time.
Elizabeth,
I appreciate you being
you.
here in studio.